our afternoon lunchtime panel. That's okay, Tom. So I'm really delighted. I'm going to introduce our first two panelists, and then our third panelist is on his way, so he should be here shortly. But it's really my privilege and my honor to introduce all three of them. They're going to be talking to you a little bit about their pro bono experiences through RMIAN. And, you know, it's always incredibly valuable. You've heard from experts up until now. I think it's really incredibly valuable to hear from folks who have expertise in other areas of law, but we're brave enough souls to jump into this really complicated and complex area of law and have a really powerful impact on clients' lives and the clients who they've served. So I'm going to make my intro brief so that they have time to share all of their wisdom with you. But please know that each of these attorneys is just truly exceptional and is held in the highest regard by all of us at RMIAN. So to my left is Chris Dietrich, and he is an associate at Snell & Wilmer. He's in that firm's commercial litigation group. He focuses on complex commercial litigation. He's been recognized in Colorado Super Lawyers. He's been in the Rising Stars edition in their business litigation section. And then immediately to his left is Niti Pawar, and she's the founder of her own firm that focuses on mediation and employment law. Previously, Niti was a partner with DeMana and Jackson, and before that, she was a public defender. She has been consistently recognized in numerous publications, such as Best Lawyers in America, Colorado Super Lawyers, and as one of the Denver Business Journal's 40 Under 40. She's also a founding board member of the South Asian Bar Association of Colorado. And then to her left is Phil Barber, who is the founder of Phil Barber PC. He has his own law firm. His practice concentrates on oil and gas law and litigation. And just this last June, he was awarded the Pro Bono Service Award from the Colorado chapter of the American Immigration Lawyers Association for his work with detained asylum seekers fleeing persecution in their home countries. So both Chris and Phil have worked with RMIAN's cases through our detention program with detained asylum seekers. And then Niti is going to provide perspective on representing kids through RMIAN's children's program. So I'm hoping that you all could open it up just by really providing a brief overview of the types of cases that you've worked on, obviously without revealing any identifying confidential client information, but just talk a little bit about your experiences as a volunteer attorney with RMIAN.
Sure. I've done detained cases, and my clients have been young Somali men who were persecuted by Al-Shabaab, a terrorist group affiliated with Al-Qaeda. And different kinds of situations, but the common thread is they were both practicing Sufi Muslims, which is a common type of Islam practiced in Somalia, but that is different than the much more severe Wahhabist interpretation of Islam practiced by Al-Shabaab. So the cases as they came in, these young men were both one was targeted for recruitment, and Al-Shabaab came to his village and talked to the elders and said, each family has to provide a son for us. And he didn't want to do that. He went into hiding. They found him anyway. Then they tortured him for several days, tying him up and leaving him outside during the hot sun, and then splashing water on his face every hour on the hour at night to keep him awake. Eventually, he was able to, during one of those breaks in between the water sessions at night, he was able to sort of break his way through, get back to his parents' house, and flee, and ultimately get himself through the aid of smugglers to South America, up through Central America, and to the San Isidro facility on the other side of the border. And what always struck me about both of these cases is these are young men, barely more than kids, and who are terrified for their lives and who just want to be left alone and just wanted to practice their religion as they saw it, and were being told that they would be killed if they continued to do that. and then we'll get more into the sort of the actual practice and the actual logistics of being in the case. And I know you're going to get more of that later on this afternoon, but I think it was this kind of work is often described as a death penalty case in traffic court, and that's somewhat flip, but it's very true. The sliding scale of personal gravity of the situation compared to extremely lax procedural rules and inability to sort of meet with opposing counsel, and opposing counsel constantly changing because it's a different government lawyer each time, is a little bit intense and difficult to adjust to. But that said, you all can do this work. If there are those of you out there that are taking on pro bono cases or thinking about taking on a pro bono case, you can do all of this. You'll learn. We did.
Okay, so my name's Neethi Pawar, and I am, as Michaela so unnecessarily gave information about me, the critical points of my practice are, I was a public defender in the municipal courts in Denver for 3 years. Then I went into private practice. Worked with the firms Mann and Jackson for about 10 years, and I've been on my own now for about 8 years. And so I have a background in family law practice. So I've done divorce work, I've done custody cases. Custody was not my expertise when I was litigating. I mediate now, I don't litigate anymore, except when RMIAN makes me go to court. The family law practice was more on the high asset, kid issues were involved, but if the sole purpose of the case was this is a contested custody case, it was not my bailiwick necessarily. I'm telling you this because the type of work I've done for RMIAN is custody work. So it's not like this is something that I always had this passion and drive and, gee, this makes so much sense for me. It came about because I came to this event last year. I came to the CLE and said, there is a lot going on in the immigration world, a lot of that has to do with international politics that ring very close to my heart. And I'm an attorney, and this is crazy. I have to do something. I have no idea where to begin. So I came to this very CLE last year, not knowing anything about immigration law, not knowing about RMIAN, not knowing what kids needed, where these courtrooms were happening, nothing. Mm-hmm. All I knew was I did some divorce work for, a dozen years. So I listened to all the presentations, and I was overwhelmed. And I thought, how these people are experts in their fields, and this is so technical, and it's a moving target, and how can I possibly help? I'm in over my head. Gee, this is great. Eye-opening experience, but maybe this isn't for me. Then they got to the presentation talking about representing kids and needing attorneys to help kids in courtrooms. The one that I felt was my foot in the door, like, okay, this makes sense to me, was getting predicate orders out of the domestic relations courts. Like, okay, now we're speaking my language. I understand this. There are some things that I'm connecting with. Exactly. I understand these courts. I understand these processes. Oh, Title 14. Hey, I know what that means. T's and U's and H's, and that's not my lingo. So Title 14, I'm like, okay, great. Where do I sign up? What do I do? And still, it was kind of overwhelming. I signed up for the send me a case and let me know what I need to do. I was connected with one of the attorneys, and they sent me my fact pattern, and then these I don't want to call them form motions, but some example motions of the petition and how you get started. And I read these petitions, and there was a lot of citations to a lot of federal law and treaties and things that, again, I was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? I need to do some more studying. Which I did, and that's what's amazing about this, is you learn so much because you think, I need to know what I'm signing off on. Right. And all of the material RMIAN has put for you together on their site. There's an attorney portal that gives you access to their memos and their briefs and these overviews and takeaways, like here's this 5-page overview that gets pretty technical. And there's a summary with the takeaways where you feel like this is graspable. I can get this, and I can confidently convey this in a courtroom if I have to. I can convey this to a judge, and I can stand with confidence saying, I know more about this judge than you do, so you need to follow what I am suggesting need to be done today, because I'm the only one in this courtroom that does get it. Mm-hmm. And that confidence is given to you by RMIAN. They treat their volunteers and prepare them well. I had access to the attorneys to answer questions that I felt were silly, and then I would have these great discussions where they're like, no, you're hitting the nail on the head. That's the tension. That's where the potential where things can take a turn in a direction that we don't necessarily want them to. You've identified it. It's very reassuring in the sense that, okay, great, I'm recognizing the potential pitfalls, I'm preparing for them. Again, I'm confident when I'm standing in front of a judge that I know more about this than they do. Then, okay, so that's all the technical, do I know and do I have the skills and how can I possibly take on a case in immigration when that's not my area of expertise, and aren't I doing more harm than good? So you overcome that hurdle. Then you show up and you meet your client, and it's a kid. It's a 12-year-old. It's, for me, it was a 12-year-old and now a 17-year-old. And I'm not a parent, and I don't do like kid stuff. Isn't my I get more passionate about animals sometimes, and maybe that's a knock, and maybe it's not. But boy, you meet these kids, and you just see like their hope, and you understand like what that means. What has to be going on in your life to make you decide as a 12-year-old that I'm gonna find a coyote and not tell anybody, and tell you their story of their journey crossing through Central America, Mexico, getting to a border, what their story is, and how, well, yeah, that's worth it, because it's hope. I'm a human that has something to contribute other than what's just laid out for me because of my government or because of my society or because of my family. And you think, if they're willing to go through all of that, I can be a little uncomfortable not being an expert in this area and give this kid a shot. I mean, it's incredible. They empower you. And not because they appear, at least in my cases, they're not because they appear like, I'm so tough and I'm so strong. It's the opposite. It's because this kid was like any of my nephews. This kid was like, my cousins back in India, where they're just goofy and teenagery and everything else that goes along with that. Yet something just drove them to say, I need a chance. Can somebody give me a chance? They're not even articulating that. They don't realize that that's what they're doing, and that's what you represent to them. You go, okay. So then you hear them, and then you're kind of scared because there's a real life at stake. And I've done my handful of hearings, and I've done my contested custody cases, and they've all been rewarding in their own regard. And clients who were paying me were very appreciative. And I had experts, and I had psychologists involved, and teachers, and I had parental responsibility evaluations. And then you do this, and you have nothing. The hearing isn't contested most of the time, all the time. Not contested. I mean, how stressful for a 20-plus year divorce lawyer is a non-contested hearing? Not stressful. And yet I went into court, and literally I was like shaking. My hands were shaking looking at my notes, and I took note. Like, you're doing something important and you're paying attention because you understand that some kid's life, literally his life is in your hands. So get it together. And so you do, and you present it, and you do it confidently, and the judge looks at you like, wow, she does know more about this than I do. I'm just going to tell me where to sign. And I say, yes, here's your form of order, sign here, please, judge. Thank you very much. And I barely speak like small talk Spanish. So I'm not communicating really great, really well with my clients. The interpreter is there for the hearing, and then they go on their way because they have to, 15 other hearings within that hour in the courthouse that they have to handle. And then I walk out, and okay, thanks, good luck, small talk, hugs, and they go on their way. And so then I go to my car and sit there, and I process it, and just overwhelmed with what just happened, and why am I feeling this wave of emotion that has never happened in any of the other kinds of cases that I've handled. And you go, okay, that was rough, and that was insane, and I don't even know how to process this. Wow. And then you think, I got to take some time. And, and a few days goes by, and you go, okay, I'm ready for my next case. So, yeah, it's amazing, and they set you up well. And honestly, if I can do it, anybody can do it. So find your way. There's different footholds. I haven't done the asylum case yet. I'm actually really interested to hear from both of you guys because that's, I think, next on the horizon for me. But I'm still very intimidated by it, and this isn't my world. And but I'm sure you guys will convince me otherwise.
Hard act to follow, man. I have had 2 asylum cases go to hearing. I have one going to hearing tomorrow. The 2 asylum cases I had were for young Eritrean men who live in, the worst of the worst place. And it's really hard to grasp what these people have been through. You can watch it on the TV, and you can see the boat people and the parents who put their kids in boats. And that's what this is all about. Ooh. I don't know why I always get emotional with these things, but I do. Anyway, so 2 Eritrean guys who were held underground in black holes for 4 years, beaten, starved, and somehow, get away. And then a case tomorrow for a transgender from Mexico. Well, first of all, I have to figure out, what the heck does transgender mean? So talk about a learning experience. You really appreciate the differences in human beings when you do cases like this, because every one of them has a different story than you do by far. And to learn what it's like to be transgender in Mexico and to come to this country with nothing. And, tomorrow we go to hearing. And the question is going to be, is this person, this is a question you'll hear all the time. How do we know if this person is even telling the truth? They have no documentation. Basically, they have no records. Sometimes they might be able to come up with a friend of a friend of a friend who could submit a statement that would corroborate some of their story, but that's one of the sort of initial hurdles, is getting the story put together in a way that it's believable, that it's not just, some drug runner, some mule from Central America, but, a human being who has experienced this horror. So the client tomorrow basically was sex trafficked for a year in Tijuana and finally got away. And we're knock on wood, that we're able to present a case that's compelling enough to get her asylum or some other protection, either, withholding of deportation or withholding under the Convention Against Torture. And what I have to say about these cases is that, they're kind of the magic of being a lawyer. When you think about why, most of us went to law school, it's because we wanted to help people. And that's what this is all about. So I'm going to stop, but it's really tremendous work, and RMIAN will, basically set the table. So all you have to do is, not all you have to do, but they will provide you resources that you can't believe. They help you find country conditions experts, because for me that's been very important in all of my cases, is somebody who can tell the court what it's really like, and essentially hope that corroborates your client's story. So, RMIAN is a terrific group, and it's a big challenge too. I'm not going to sort of soft sell the amount of work you're going to have to do in these cases, because if you decide to take one, you need to realize, as Chris said, it's a death penalty case in traffic court, and you get 2 hours to present the case, and you got a lot of time to prepare it, but it's a big deal. So if you take one, be ready to go full bore on it, and you'll spend hours on it. You're going to commit your own personal resources, and you can maybe get some help for some out-of-pocket expenses for experts and translators, but assume that there will be some commitment there. And I'm sort of telling the side that probably Michaela doesn't want me to tell, but just be committed. And in the grand scheme of things, it's not that much. And if an oil and gas lawyer can do this stuff, then pretty much anybody can. So, I hope you'll take a case. I really do. I think it'll open your eyes to a part of the law that you probably thought was always there but never were able to get to. So that's all I've got to say.
Well, thank you. You're all making me very emotional hearing your stories. And I think, one of the most powerful parts of this work often is the connections that are made between people who may otherwise have never met and end up, sharing a really intense experience in their life, but also a friendship down the road too. So I feel like that way about many of my clients, and I know that you all have had that experience with your clients too. So the next question I had for you is if you could each just share a little bit about what was the biggest surprise coming into this work, or what was the biggest surprise in the case that you maybe didn't expect, or we didn't necessarily give you a good heads up about.
I don't know that you didn't give us a good enough heads up on anything, but I think that's a big part of this. Is we feel really prepared when we start out. You get your memo, and that identifies sort of, well, here are the key areas of the law. We've sort of done a first pass, and here are the couple points that may be most useful to you, and then you examine those further and you go from there. In terms of surprises, I'm used to commercial litigation practice. I'm used to company against company. The other side is well represented. You present your arguments, and the other side attacks them back with arguments, from a perspective you may not have thought of before. And your arguments get honed over the course of time, and you have all the evidence in the world, and you're developing it. You're developing it in such a way that it's unimpeachable. It is what it is, and it's difficult to counteract that. You come into a case like this that's of such importance, but there isn't that opposing counsel on the other side. They're just not there. You show up to a preliminary hearing, and it's one government lawyer. You show up to another one, and it's a different lawyer. You show up to the final hearing, and it's a third lawyer. And so what that means is you may submit your brief, and you should submit a brief that makes all the arguments as to why your client should stay in this country. But you don't get a response brief. And so you're kind of sitting there saying, well, I think I've done a good job, but I don't know. I haven't gotten any feedback from the other side telling me I've done a terrible job, which, you're used to getting in commercial practice. And then you have to sort of sit back and say, well, did I do a terrible job, or are they just saying that? But you get some confidence in your position by having it tested, and you lack that in this. And then I think that one of the things that Phil pointed out is how do you prove your case? You don't have emails, you don't have contracts, you don't have the kinds of things I'm used to having to support a case. What I have is someone's story. I have my client, and they're the witness, and oftentimes that's it. You don't have a birth certificate to even prove that they are who they say they are. You don't have a passport because those documents aren't issued in certain parts of the world. And so what you're left with is someone with a story, and you have to corroborate it with reports by the State Department, reports by Amnesty International, reports by any number of different groups that help identify different cultural and country conditions and religious situations around the world. And you're jumping into the deep end with that kind of stuff. But ultimately, it's your client, and it's their story. And the more compelling, the better. Sometimes you can corroborate, like Phil said, with someone's testimony. And I tried to do that. I treated it like a regular civil case. And so I was trying to get something notarized and sent over. And I was trying to get the mother to confirm the story, but we had to figure out a way to say, well, we actually are calling his mother in the middle of the night in Somalia on the one phone that the village shares. And I sort of mention at the outset of the hearing that these are the witnesses I'm planning on calling. And the government lawyer just says, that's fine. We don't need to talk to them. We can just sort of accept that. And it's just a thing of, okay, I guess we don't need that. But in your mind, you're thinking, I want to be the most prepared as I can be, and it's the laxity in evidentiary rules is surprising, and how the government lawyer may come in and say, I think, they may hammer your client on cross-examination, and then at the end of it say they don't oppose asylum. But that's what they're doing. They're probing. They see a lot of people that maybe aren't telling the truth. And so they're testing, they're probing, they're trying to figure out, is there something here that gives me, as the government lawyer, a statutory basis to oppose this? Or do they look at this and say, I can get to yes on this one. But I think those were the most surprising things to me, or just sort of the nature of the litigation itself and how different it is from standard commercial practice.
I agree with Chris. The only other thing I would add is that I've been surprised at the number of really decent people that there are out there who are willing to help you out. There are experts all over the country, I mean, you know how you hear on the news, a such and such expert said this. Well, in these cases, you can find that kind of such and such expert who will say that for you. And generally, they'll do it for free, and they'll do it of their own volition. And, you know, personally, I have found the court and the lawyers I've dealt with in these cases to be surprisingly amicable. I mean, I think they all realize, you know, first of all, you're a volunteer. You're with RMIAN, which gives you a huge stamp of approval. And, you know, they hear the story and it's like, okay, sounds good to me. I mean, that's kind of what I've seen happen in these cases. So I think just the kind of case makes people friendlier than the classic, you know, confrontational, adversarial lawyer relationship. So that's been my surprise.
I don't know that I've had any tremendous surprises. I've definitely had observations, I guess, that made me think or gave me pause. I wouldn't call it adversarial, but I've been a little taken at when a judge, when you place the law in front of them, and I think their bias, and it may not be a malicious bias, but it's some perception that exists about the immigration world. How you almost can see wait a minute, it's conflicting. This is the law actually says this, and the perception of the way that it's treated is almost like somehow you're cheating. This is a loophole, and you're exploiting it, as opposed to, no, our government created this avenue precisely for this reason, and I'm helping this child utilize, and I, as an attorney, am utilizing the law given to me, and I'm asking you to apply it. That has that pause, or that where you can see them resolving that personal versus your responsibilities as a judicial officer, that conflict, that has taken me aback. I think that happens probably in a lot of cases, commercial cases, criminal defense cases, whatever, but somehow it's more palatable. And for me, again, I have my own, we all have our own biases. I'm just more sensitive to it, and I always feel that it's connected to something a little more deep-seated that is a little bit, that's a whole nother CLE, a little the uglier side of where that comes from. So putting my own emotions in that regard in check and not letting myself get defensive to the point that I had to, that took me as a little bit of a surprise.
One thing I'd like to follow up on is, again, how do you prove your case? And you can bring in experts like Phil said, and do any number of things to try and convince the court that your client is telling the truth. And oftentimes you're left with your own client's story, but sometimes there are competing versions of that story through no fault of your client. They don't speak a lick of English, and for example, and for one of my clients, spoke to someone in sort of a credible fear interview, their very first interaction with a government official in the United States, and there's a Somali interpreter brought in, but maybe from a different part of Somalia, maybe not quite understanding dialect, or maybe there's a little bit of editorializing in the translation that is given. And sometimes that can give rise to, when you're using a different interpreter down the line to sort of test the story and probe it and see if everything lines up and the story they're telling you now is consistent with the documents you see that are translated into English. And there can be small things that may seem minor to you, and you can assume that those might be translation difficulties, but the lawyer from ICE isn't going to assume that. And sometimes there's a well, here you said that you applied for asylum in Kenya, and here you said you didn't. How do you explain that? Did you? What happened? And those things when all you have is your client's credibility, little things that are probably not your client's fault, but that maybe they didn't quite understand the word that was used or a particular dialect that was used, that can come out in a way that can ultimately harm your client's case. A lot of times you can get around it, but that was another thing that I found to be somewhat surprising, is that even when it's only your client's story and they've stayed relatively consistent, there could be little nitpicky things in there that could keep them from getting silent.
Thank you all. So in the interest of time, I want to ask one more question. It's going to be an either or, since we don't have time for all the questions, and I feel like we could just listen to you talk about these cases all afternoon. But could you either share, or do both if you want, but if you could each take a turn to talk about either what was the most meaningful aspect of your experience taking on one of these pro bono cases, or if you have a tidbit or a practice pointer that you could give to this group of new pro bono attorneys that are embarking on this journey.
I'll start practice pointer and not personal experience, because we know what will happen there. Practice pointer is RMIAN will provide you with just an outstanding case referral memo that will have a surprisingly in-depth understanding of the case, even though it's probably based upon an hour of interviews and review of material. It will have, here are your arguments that you can make, that you should make, or maybe you shouldn't make. Here are resources online that are available for you. So my practice pointer is read that memo. Mine tend to be about 25 pages long. I mean, they're in depth, so you read them once and then you put it in the file and then you read it again. But that's what I would say, is focus on your memo and follow the steps that are laid out there for you. Don't be a hero.
I think I've already spoken from the personal kind of experience and what was rewarding for me personally. Just a quick practice pointer, exactly what Phil was saying. Use the resources that are available to you. Anytime you think, what should I, or where should I, or how do I, do not recreate the wheel. The resources are there. Reach out to someone. You will get an answer, whether it's that person at RMIAN or whether they put you in contact with somebody. The resources exist, and people are there and willing and happy and knowledgeable and available to help you. So definitely utilize those resources.
I'll close with a little bit of personal experience and just how personally affecting these cases can and should be, which I intend as an argument for taking these cases. They affect you. They stay with you. More than any sort of commercial case I have done or will ever do. And that's not to say I don't, that anything about my commercial work is unimportant, but I'm rarely saving lives in commercial practice, to put it that way. With one of my clients, he refused to shut down a small tobacco shop he had in Mogadishu. His father, he then told Al-Shabaab he wouldn't do it. He said, "Can I at least sell off my inventory?" And they said no. And he then told them an expletive that they should go do to themselves, and that did not go over well. And so he fled. He was trying to then go home and get his family out. And then he saw his brother go in to his house and see his brother get shot and killed because Al-Shabaab thought that it was him. In my other case, the young man who was being recruited, he fled back to his village, told his parents, what had happened while he was in Al-Shabaab custody, and they said, "Well, we'll get you out." And so they got him sort of walking through the bush to Mogadishu, where he could then get on the train out of town, as it were. Al-Shabaab came back, took the father, and he was never heard from again. There are real-life consequences to this work, and these are people that have great stories, and you meet them and you talk to them, and it rips your heart out, and it highlights how important it is to do some pretty straightforward work. You're getting provided with the law. You're bright people. You will figure out the ins and outs of what you're doing. You will figure out the procedural steps you need to take. But these are people who have really good cases and really good arguments for why they should get to stay in this country, and they just need someone to help them out. Even just a lawyer that doesn't have experience in the area, which none of us did, just showing up and being able to help persuade, to help package an argument, to help structure things in certain ways, to maybe get an expert in here or whatever it is. It's just, it increases their chances astronomically. And so please take a case.
So please join me in giving a huge round of applause for everything that they give and for their presentations today. Okay, we're going to take a break until around 1, and then we'll start up again. Thanks.